And I know you're as anxious as I am to get into close action. But we must bring him right up beside us before we spring this trap. That will test our nerve. And discipline will count just as much as courage.
The Age of Fighting Sail. Interlude. John Paul Jones, the Yankee pirate. Though His Majesty's Navy had to admit a certain grudging respect for the American privateers who preyed on British merchant shipping during the Revolutionary War, it had nothing but contempt for the Continental Navy. The American rebels could mount only a haphazard collection of weak and ancient vessels, so poorly crewed that one colonial legislator disgustedly termed them an aggregation of tinkers, shoemakers, and horse jockeys. Yet there was one American captain who delivered as stinging a slap as the proud Royal Navy had ever received. What is more, he gave it in Britain's sacred home waters, in a classic ship-to-ship action that was witnessed by a huge crowd of Englishmen who watched it from chalk cliffs of Flamborough Head off the Yorkshire coast. The American's name was John Paul Jones. The son of a Scot gardener, he had shipped out to the West Indies in 1761 at the age of 13. After a short career as a slaver and a trader among the islands, he had slain a murderous seaman in self-defense, decided he would not receive a fair trial on the island of Tobago, and then fled to Virginia. In 1775, he volunteered as a lieutenant in the new American Navy and quickly proved himself as a naval officer. In command of the Continental Navy's 18-gun sloop of war Ranger, he seized several merchant ships in English waters, raided a coastal town, and captured the Royal Navy's 20-gun sloop Drake. So exasperating did he become that he was known to the British as the Yankee Pirate. But all that was only a prologue. On the afternoon of September 23, 1779, in the Bonhomme Richard, an ancient French merchantman that had been hastily converted to a warship, Jones sighted 41 ships off Flamborough Head. They formed a British convoy under the protection of the Royal Navy two-decker Serapis, a copper-bottomed frigate, newer, nimbler, and more powerful than the Richard. Captain Richard Pearson of the Serapis had been warned by a boatload of local citizens of the Richard's approach. As the distance between the two ships narrowed, Pearson could see that he had a clear advantage, 50 guns to the Richard's 40, and they were bigger guns, 20 18-pounders to the Richard's 6. However, Jones did have the weather gauge, the advantage of whatever wind there was on this calm day, and he brought the Richard slowly down on the Serapis. By early evening, flying a British flag as a ruse, he was within pistol shot of the British warship. At this distance, the two commanders could talk to each other. Pearson was the first. "What ship is that?" Jones whispered to his sailing master, who called back, "The Princess Royal." Pearson tried again. "Where from?" Pearson continued, "Answer immediately, or I shall be under the necessity of firing on you." At that, Jones gave an order. A red, white, and blue ensign replaced the British colors, and the Richard cut loose a devastating broadside. The Serapis answered almost simultaneously, and as the heavy balls tore through the oak planking, there was a shuddering explosion from the Richard's gun deck. Several powder charges had gone off, killing many of the gunners and putting most of the 18-pounders out of action. With the Richard's heaviest guns gone, that should have been the end of it, but Jones now performed a brilliant maneuver. Backing his fore and main topsails, he slowed the Richard and turned her across the Serapis' stern. He thus put himself in a raking position, in which all the guns along a ship's side can fire the length of the enemy. After a brisk exchange of broadsides, Jones realized that his only chance lay in grappling and boarding the English ship. But Pearson's Marines slaughtered Jones's boarders as they struggled to climb on the Serapis' deck. In the close quarters, Pearson called out to Jones, "Has your ship struck?" Jones was astonished. He shouted back those famous words, "I have not yet begun to fight." A full moon had risen over the water, and the crowd watched in awe as Jones sent the Richard quickly forward across the Serapis' bow to rake her once more. This maneuver was also not as successful as Jones wanted, but Jones soon got his wish to grapple with his enemy. Just as the Richard was passing the Serapis' bow, her rigging caught the Serapis' bowsprit. The breeze pivoted her around until she came alongside the Serapis' bow to stern. Jones called for grappling hooks, and the two ships lay locked together, their guns booming, marksmen sweeping each deck and clouds of smoke swirling from dozens of fires on both vessels. The murderous pounding went on, and the Serapis' heavier cannon were doing terrible damage. The Richard's hull was riddled. Her decks were held up by only a few stanchions. But Jones's sharpshooters were causing carnage on the Serapis' decks and clearing the British from the tops as well. Now some of the Richard's men climbed out on the yardarms to lob grenades down onto the enemy. Incredibly, one of them, William Hamilton, scrambled clear across the Serapis' yardarms with a basket of grenades. And from there, taking dead aim, he dropped a grenade neatly through a hatch onto a pile of powder cartridges. The explosion seemed to lift the Serapis' deck. It killed 20 men at the guns, horribly burned many others, and knocked out half of the Serapis' cannon. Nevertheless, the Richard seemed finished. She was settling in the water. The Richard's chief gunner, Henry Gardner, could stand it no longer. He screamed at the Serapis, "Quarter, quarter, for God's sake!" Jones grabbed a pistol and flung it, knocking Gardner down. But Pearson heard the cry and called across to Jones, "Sir, do you ask for quarter?" Jones replied, "No, sir. I haven't as yet thought of it, but I'm determined to make you strike." Pearson turned back to his ship and ordered, "Boarders away!" The Serapis' surviving Marines surged toward the Richard's deck, but confronted by the Richard's pike-armed defenders, they quickly fell into retreat. Now Jones dashed to one of the 9-pounders, whose crew had been badly wounded. With superhuman effort, he single-handedly trained the gun on the main mast of the Serapis. He loaded it with double shot and fired. Loaded and fired it again. And again. On the Serapis, Pearson looked about his decks littered with dead, and at the fires burning in a dozen places. At last he stepped around the bodies of the staff where the red ensign was nailed, and ripped it down. One of Jones's officers escorted the English captain over to the Richard's splintered quarterdeck. Pearson handed his sword to Jones. As he did so, the Serapis' mainmast cracked and crashed over the side. Both captains watched the mast and its tangled gear splash into the sea. Then Jones returned Pearson's sword and invited the defeated officer to his smoky, shattered cabin for a glass of wine. In this fiery 3.5-hour dance of death, John Paul Jones, the American pirate, had outmaneuvered and outfought one of the Royal Navy's best captains in one of its finest ships. The Admiralty held a court-martial after Pearson was returned in a prisoner exchange deal. But the court could find no fault with the Serapis' captain. He had fought well, and he had, after all, protected the merchant ships from Jones's attack. In the end, Pearson was not only absolved of the blame, he was knighted for gallantry. When John Paul Jones heard the news, he exclaimed, "Should I have the good fortune to fall into him again, I'll make him a lord."